So, long story short, this date was a failure. I was living in Seattle at the time, but had gone to Portland for the date. I had been out with a woman named Marissa in downtown Portland and thought that it was going well. And right at the end of the night, she said something so painfully ignorant that the idea of inviting her back to my apartment disappeared completely. I cannot even remember what it was now. It was the 90s. Everyone was careless with their words. It probably was not even that terrible. Either way, it led me to taking the miserable late bus home. So, picture it. I was a foolish, tipsy little nobody riding high on my own self-righteous pride after sending a beautiful woman away and turning down a night together to defend whatever moral line I believed in. And so, naturally, about 5 minutes into my ride across the city, I was sitting there regretting every decision I had made and feeling more than a little angry with myself. And maybe that is why, when the loud punks started shouting every insult they could think of, I did not stay silent. Now, I know that I should have. I should have endured the storm of insults aimed at my masculinity and my orientation and kept quiet like a sensible passenger on a late route is expected to do. Instead, I turned around in my seat and told them exactly where they could put their heavy boots. And they were the only other two riders on the bus. One of them was a skinny guy with a tall red mohawk, and the other was a bulky fellow with green and black hair shaved into a crooked side pattern. I could not tell if he was solid muscle or simply overweight. Both of them were filthy-mouthed, though, and I told them to shove their boots into each other. They sat in shocked silence for a moment, and then, like cackling animals, those two idiots began rattling my seat, kicking and punching the back of it without actually touching me. One of them started smacking the bus window, and I finally reached my limit. They'd been sitting on the back row when I first boarded, so I had chosen a seat near the middle, and they had clearly moved forward just to sit behind me. There were not many empty rows ahead of me, but I tried to move anyway. I ended up halfway between my original seat and the driver. I do not know why I believed that shifting forward would somehow make them lose interest. Obviously, it did not, and the moment they sensed fear and hesitation, they stomped down the aisle and dropped into the seats directly behind me. Now came even more slurs and threats, with one of them growling about how he would cut me and leave me bleeding. I was still stewing in my own frustration and fired back a few ugly words of my own. I caught sight of the driver in the front mirror, and she was shaking her head at me, giving me a look that said, I should have known better. I recognized her vaguely. She was a tall, broad-shouldered black woman I had seen driving the late routes around Seattle a few times before. We had exchanged friendly small talk in the past. I somehow had not noticed it was her behind the wheel when I climbed on board. I suppose I was still too busy feeling sorry for myself over the disaster of a date. I stood up to move again, but the punks grabbed me and pushed me back into the seat. I thought that they had no right to put their hands on me. I felt a surge of anger at the little rat. I considered turning around and striking one of them hard. I knew I would get myself in serious trouble with the law if I tried. Instead, I tried to get up and move again, and again the punk shoved me back down into the seat. I tried once more. He pushed me down again. I tried another time. This time the punk pulled me down so hard that the back of my head slammed against the seat with a loud crack. The driver shouted at all of us to settle down. I muttered something insulting to them and quickly left my seat to move right behind the driver. I asked her when the next stop was, and she said it would be a couple of minutes, but she promised to make those punks get off there and told me not to leave because she believed they would follow me. I went back to my seat, and once again they started up with their slurs and insults. They seemed to enjoy the sound of my head hitting the seat, because one of them did it deliberately, grabbing me by the forehead and yanking my neck back until I was choking. I shook them off and scrambled across the aisle and back a few seats, trying to get myself to safety. The punks got up, furious at me for daring to resist their assault. The bus driver began screaming at them to sit down and leave me alone. Instead, they crowded into the aisle and turned on her. The bigger punk, who I could now see was solid muscle, told the driver he would make her wish she had never been born. That was when he pulled a real hunting knife out of his belt. Everything happened too fast for me to process. There was a sudden burst of speed, and then an even more sudden stop. The big punk flew forward through the air, his knife clattering into the aisle, and he hit the dashboard so hard that I heard the crunch of a bone over the splintering of metal and glass and the blaring of the bus horn. The punk crumpled to the floor, completely unconscious, and the driver was up and out of her seat, yelling through the open door for someone to call the police. She threw herself onto the other punk, slamming him to the ground and pinning him there, where she proceeded to sit on him with full force. I took her cue, still shaken, and walked over to the unconscious punk to make sure he remained out cold. A short time later, the police arrived. What had happened was that the bus driver had taken an unconventional emergency action and crashed the bus directly into a wall to stop the punks from stabbing her or me. And it turned out to be a clever idea, even if it was extremely reckless. The police took the two thugs away, interviewed me, and then let me go. I am happy to say that the bus driver kept her job because I saw her driving the late route several more times after that night. Even now, she is still a hero to me. She was the driver who saved me from possibly being stabbed by risking her own life and her career to steer that bus straight into a concrete barrier. It was a terrifying but unforgettable ride. But it wasn't the only time I found myself in real danger in a very different part of the country. Not long after that, my fiancée and I were on a work trip in the southern United States. Because I do not want to start arguments, most of the trip was wonderful, filled with friendly and interesting people. Near the end of our stay, though, something happened that truly frightened me and made me never want to go back there again. I was traveling with the woman who is now my wife, and we were enjoying ourselves. But the pleasant details are not important. Just imagine an ordinary couple having an ordinary good time and doing a few memorable things. However you picture it is fine. The hotel was comfortable, the meals were excellent, and once my business meetings were finished, we finally had time to explore the city and the countryside. The area had a strange mix of old historic buildings and modern architecture, a combination that should have looked awkward but somehow worked perfectly. Visitors were warned not to walk alone in certain neighborhoods, and we followed that advice for most of the trip. Toward the end, we became careless because everything had felt so calm and safe. After a fantastic dinner one evening, my wife and I decided to take a walk. We lost track of time and ended up wandering for hours, holding hands and enjoying each other's company. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have her beside me, especially since she had agreed to marry me a few months earlier. We eventually sat on a bench near a lake and watched the sun disappear while the first stars appeared in the sky. For a moment, everything felt perfect. She later told me I could share what happened as long as I made sure she was described kindly. It was mostly her idea to keep walking farther and farther from the busy parts of the city. She wanted to see more nature and quiet places, and I went along with it. When it finally got late, I called a taxi using a number we had taken from the front desk of our hotel. The staff had assured us it was a dependable local service, so we had no reason to worry. When the driver arrived, he greeted us with a friendly smile. We checked the ID badge and company details the hotel had given us. We made sure he matched the details listed on the company website, doing everything the hotel had told us to do. After that, we gave him the address of our hotel, and he typed it into his GPS. The driver engaged us in a very cheerful conversation, even though his English was broken. As we began driving, I was sitting in the back with my wife, looking out the window. It surprised me to realize just how far we had walked. We were completely in the middle of nowhere, full countryside with no buildings in obvious sight. The taxi's headlights in the moon lit the fields as we drove past them. That was why I did not really notice when the other vehicle fell into line behind us. After a few minutes, I caught sight of shadows in the driver's rear-view mirror and leaned back to look over my shoulder. I whispered to my wife that a van was following us, and it did not have its headlights on. She called out to the driver and seemed to do a better job of communicating with him than I had. The driver glanced into his rear-view mirror and then gave us a big, beaming smile and told us it was nothing to worry about. I said it was very unusual for anyone to be driving at night with no headlights. The driver said it was fine. Some people on these roads did not want to be noticed, and it was better not to keep looking at them. I told him that if they did not want to be noticed, they would not be tailgating us and getting lit up by our rear lights. The driver just laughed and kept on driving. A few minutes later, the van behind us flashed its headlights and hit its indicator in a very clear gesture for us to pull over. The driver glanced at me with very wide eyes and said that we had to stop. My wife, bless her, told him that if he valued his life, there was no way on God's green earth that he should stop. She said he needed to slam down on the pedal and floor it out of there. The driver was not cooperating, though. He pulled over to the side of the road, and the van followed. We sat there, pinned in the van's headlights, as the driver got out and walked behind. We heard a bit of shouting, and then footsteps crunching up to the door on my wife's side. My heart sank with dismay as I saw the driver, hands behind his head, being held at gunpoint by another man in a mask. A second masked man tapped on the window with the barrel of his gun. My wife shrieked, flinching away, but the man gestured for us to get out. So we did. A third masked man slammed me against the side of the car and began patting me down. He took my wallet, cell phone, and pretty much everything. My wife, thankfully, did not have to deal with the pat-down treatment, but the man took her purse and tossed it to the second gunman. Meanwhile, the first man had secured our taxi driver's wrists with what seemed to be a plastic tie and was guiding him to the back of their van. I looked and saw the gunman ushering the driver into the back and then slamming the door. The man returned, and the three men commanded us to strip. Reluctantly, we did, down to our underwear. The men seemed to find this hilarious and began to insist that we remove our underwear too. Not wanting to seem weak in front of them, I dropped my boxers and just stood there, bare and defiant, looking at them. My wife was crying and begging. As calmly as I could, I told them to leave her alone. I honestly believed I would need to fight one of the men to grab his gun if I wanted to protect my wife's dignity, but they only sneered and muttered whatever. Then one of them said something that sounded insulting in Spanish. The three men grabbed our clothes and shoes. Two of them went back to the pickup truck, while the other climbed into the taxi we had been forced out of. Then, without a word, the men drove off, leaving us stranded, naked and alone in the middle of nowhere. It sounds a little absurd looking back, but it truly was not at the time. As we walked for almost 2 hours, the area gradually turned into open desert terrain. The desert night in Arizona felt far colder than the day. My wife jokes now that I am only making an excuse, but I remain genuinely grateful that we avoided hypothermia. Thankfully, at some point along the road, we found a large discarded blanket that I turned into a rough skirt for myself and a shawl for my wife. Eventually, we reached a small ranch property where the owners kindly helped us call the police. We were taken to the local station in Flagstaff, interviewed, and forced to make several calls to the U.S. Embassy. It was incredibly stressful and almost more frightening than being forced to strip at gunpoint. Almost. The officers did not seem to care very much. Not even when we explained that our driver had been taken at gunpoint and was possibly murdered. Two of the deputies said something to each other in Spanish and then laughed. Of course, I could not remember the name of the rideshare company either, and when I later tried to find the card on the hotel notice board, it had disappeared. My wife and I wanted to leave the state as fast as possible, but we had to deal with all the miserable problems that follow when your wallet and phone are stolen far from home. The paperwork was a nightmare, and this story would take another hour simply to describe it all. The final development came the night before we were scheduled to fly back from Phoenix. Everything had finally been arranged, and we felt grateful that we had been careful enough to leave important things behind, with our passports, most of our bank cards, and even my wife's cell phone locked securely in the hotel room safe. We had gone to a small restaurant near the hotel for one last meal, and we were walking back as the sun went down. I heard a laugh that sounded sharply familiar. Looking through the crowd, I locked eyes with a smiling, cheerful man. It was our driver, and I felt completely certain of it. He was sitting at a table with the same three men, and they were clearly celebrating something. Our eyes met, and I saw panic cross the driver's face. By the time I pushed my way through the people to confront him, he had vanished. His three friends were still at the table, though, and they pretended not to understand when I spoke to them in English, which felt strange, because most people in this area speak at least some English. They acted as if they could not understand a single word I said when I asked about the man who had been with them. But they did seem to find me extremely amusing. Then one of them pointed at my shirt and quietly said, "Nice." I cannot be completely sure, but I am convinced that they were the masked gunmen. In some ways, it felt like a relief to realize that our taxi driver had not been killed, and the odds are that we would not have been either. I suspect the guns were likely fake as well, but understanding that we had been tricked by four criminals trying to earn quick money from a clueless tourist did not feel much better, if I am being honest with you. Still, at least nobody was shot. Long before the taxi ride, there was another moment on public transportation that I will never forget. When I was younger, I attended college in Seattle. I often rode the bus across the city to see friends or to reach the library. Most of the time, I hated taking the bus. It smelled terrible. The people seemed strange and rude, and I was often bothered or shouted at. Usually, I did not fear for my life, though. But that day was different. I was seated near the middle of the bus, beside a rough-looking man in worn, casual clothes. He kept glancing at his watch and muttering, staring out the window to his left, as if that could make the bus move faster. I was hardly paying attention to him, though. I was watching another man a few seats away, who kept scratching his neck and shifting in his seat. He was pale, sweaty, and shaky, and he looked like he was burning up, yet he wore a heavy coat in the middle of summer. He looked like an obvious heroin addict, and you would see them around Seattle sometimes, and he usually just made me feel sad. Now this man was giving off seriously bad vibes, jerking and looking around as if he was studying the other passengers. I watched as his eyes fixed on an old man across the aisle in 1 or 2 rows ahead of him. The bus continued on for a few seconds with nothing happening, but I could see the sketchy man focusing on the old man and staring at him. Eventually, the shifty man dragged himself from his seat and stumbled across the aisle to where the old man was sitting. He leaned in and grabbed the old man's shoulder. The old man looked at him with clear alarm and fear, and the twitchy man whispered something that I could not hear, and then reached into his back pocket. I watched as he pulled out his switchblade. Now, I was not going to tolerate any of this. Immediately, I started to get to my feet. The man with the knife had not seen me, so I thought I might sneak up on him and hit him or grab him. And then something happened that took me completely by surprise. The rough-looking man sitting next to me grabbed my arm and pulled me back down into my seat. He said something to me like, "Do not be an idiot hero." Then I thought he said that he would cut me if I intervened. I slumped back into my seat in terror, thinking that there were 2 men with knives on the bus, maybe working together, and I was going to be robbed by this other man. And then he surprised me by climbing over me and stepping into the aisle. The man then launched himself down the aisle, shouting, "Freeze! This is the police!" or something like that. The jittery man with the knife spun around, shaking and drenched in sweat, and he lifted the blade on pure instinct as the off-duty officer rushed toward him. At that same instant, the bus driver hit the brakes hard, throwing the officer off balance and pitching him forward. He landed squarely on the knife, and the entire bus seemed to inhale at once when the awful sound of steel entering flesh filled the air. The off-duty officer staggered back, gripping, thank God, his arm. The knife was jutting from his bicep, where he had twisted just enough during the fall to avoid something worse. The wired, strung-out man stared at his own hands, snapping his head between them in a way that looked almost unreal. It might have been comical if he had not suddenly stepped toward the injured officer and tried to grab the knife again. Then, something none of us expected took place. The elderly passenger rose from his seat and locked the attacker's arm behind his back. He obviously did not have much physical power left. He was an old man, yet he understood exactly how to apply the hold and managed to keep the attacker pinned long enough to force him down. Several other riders rushed in and helped hold the man on the floor of the aisle. I hurried over to the wounded officer to see how bad he was hurt. Blood was pouring out, and my first foolish impulse was to pull the knife free, but he barked at me to leave it alone. Before long, the bus reached the station, and on-duty police were waiting for us. That was when I learned beyond any doubt that the injured man truly was an off-duty officer. He even said he was sorry for shoving me earlier, and thanked me again and again while the paramedics treated him behind the ambulance. The older passenger turned out to be a retired, disabled Gulf War veteran. I am not trying to paint him as some kind of movie hero. It was more like an ordinary old man getting control of a reckless addict, but he clearly knew his technique, and in younger days he could have handled the situation by himself. The twitching attacker was hauled away in handcuffs and most likely ended up in jail. I was never the main target, yet the whole ordeal terrified me and left me nervous every time I rode a bus for years afterward. After the incident on that bus, I hoped I would never again be trapped in a situation I couldn't escape. Unfortunately, years later, another encounter proved that fear can follow you anywhere, even onto an airplane. This happened to me last year. I was on a flight from Denver to Tokyo to visit my partner who had taken a job overseas. I have always been uneasy about flying, and the idea of spending 15 hours in the air filled me with dread. I tried everything I could think of ahead of time to keep my nerves under control. I watched online videos about managing stress. I played a calm audiobook while waiting at the gate and splurged on a business class seat. Maybe with fewer crying children around and a little extra room to stretch out, the trip would feel more bearable. Eventually, just before boarding, I decided that it was all too much and dropped a diazepam. I made my way onto the plane as one of the first to board, stowed my bag in the overhead compartment, and settled into my window seat and promptly fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I had groggily sleepwalked my way through the pre-flight checks and the takeoff, and was only vaguely aware that I even had a next-door neighbor in the seat beside mine. I woke up a few hours later, distinctly in the air, and feeling a lot more relaxed than I had been when I boarded. Right then, I was alone with nobody in the seat beside me. I gestured to the flight attendant and asked for a bottle of sparkling mineral water, which was delicious and refreshing and calmed my nerves. I noticed that someone must have been sitting beside me because there was a comic tucked into the front seat. I relaxed back in my seat for a few minutes when a shadow started to loom over me. With a heavy plop, My neighbor landed in his seat, almost causing my sparkling mineral water to spill. I turned to look at him and realized that he was already leaning in, looking at me very closely. In fact, he had a big ginger beard, bleach blonde, spiky hair, eyeliner, a septum ring, various other piercings, and one of those flesh tunnels in his ears, and these very wide pupils. "I'm Travis," he slurred, and he thrust his hand into my lap, I guess for me to just shake it. And I managed to do so and then introduced myself. And I don't mean to be rude, but he absolutely reeked. I guess because he had just come back from the bathroom, but good God, it was not nice in close quarters. Travis told me that he was non-binary and used he, him, and they, them pronouns. He went on to explain that he worked as some kind of MMA promoter and also a playwright, and then talked at me non-stop for almost an hour. And this sounds like I'm exaggerating, but he would not stop. According to Travis, he was going to change the worlds of both literature and mixed martial arts, and had been told that he had a unique and powerful voice. I wasn't sure about that, but he certainly had a unique and powerful body odor. Eventually, it all got too much, and I had to excuse myself to get up and use the bathroom. Travis pretended to shift to let me through, but even with the extra space in business class, I was forced to brush and squeeze up against him to get past. I went to the plain bathroom and spent as long as I could in there without seeming weird. I didn't even need to go. I just needed a break from Travis and his strange, intense monologuing. And when I got back, I decided that I would pretend to nap or put some headphones in and listen to a podcast. And when I opened the door to the bathroom, I was met face to face with Travis. And I wish that I was making this next part up. It is genuinely disgusting to me to think about it now, let alone share it. But I think it is an important moment in understanding how messed up the next part becomes. As I tried to step out of the bathroom, Travis just looked around me, leaning forward, and then took a deliberate and very pointed nasal inhale, as if to get a deep whiff of the bathroom after I had used it. Just typing it out again makes me shudder. Then they made direct, unblinking eye contact with me, as if to say they knew exactly what I had just seen. I thought to myself that I definitely had. Next, Travis put their arm out in that deliberate way people use to block someone from leaving a doorway. They did it and leaned forward, body first, making it clear I wasn't supposed to get past them. Then, Travis raised their eyebrows and suggested that I join the Mile High Club with them. They didn't ask, they suggested. Before I could even respond, they began stepping forward, gently but firmly, trying to force me backward into the bathroom. I told them there was absolutely no chance of that happening. My jaw nearly hit the floor when Travis asked if the reason I refused to have intercourse with them in the airplane bathroom was because I had a problem with non-binary people. I was completely stunned. I assumed they had to be joking, but Travis was serious. They adopted a hard expression and started lecturing me about gender norms and hidden prejudice, and I could barely react. It felt like something ripped out of a bizarre online argument, except it was real and happening right in front of me. Travis asked if it was possible that I was rejecting the offer because of some kind of internal bias. I held up my finger to show my engagement ring and told them it had nothing to do with gender. I said my future wife would not approve of me joining the Mile High Club with a random stranger under any circumstances. Travis's fist tightened against the doorframe, and they quietly punched the wall. It wasn't strong enough to damage anything or draw attention, but it was clearly meant as a message that they believed they were stronger than me. I ducked under Travis's arm and hurried back to my seat. As I walked down the aisle, I caught the eye of one of the flight attendants and tried to give him the universal expression that says, "Someone is bothering me and I need help." He seemed to understand, because a few minutes after Travis dropped back into their seat with a heavy thud, the attendant came over and asked if everything was all right. I told him it was, and asked for another sparkling mineral water in about 5 minutes, as a quiet excuse to have him return and check on the situation. By that point, Travis was muttering to themselves under their breath. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but when I finally understood, a cold feeling moved through my chest. Travis was whispering ugly and vicious things aimed directly at me. I can't repeat the exact phrases, but they were some of the most hateful things anyone has ever said to me. I couldn't believe what was happening. First came the strange accusations of prejudice. Then followed a stream of cruel slurs and threats. When the flight attendant returned, Travis went silent. But every time we were alone again, the muttering started up once more. For the entire remaining flight, I was trapped in the window seat for another 10 hours, forced to sit beside someone who whispered vague, unsettling threats under their breath without stopping. The worst part is they did not directly aim the words at me. They were just saying things about that woman, and I found myself genuinely stuck. I did not know how to report someone for threats when they were not directly threatening me. Looking back, I could have told the flight attendant that Travis was engaging in deeply antisocial behavior. This story shows how easy it is for someone like Travis to make you freeze completely. Eventually, we landed. I waited for Travis to leave, and at first they refused. They stayed stubbornly sitting in their seat, still talking without stopping. Finally, the flight attendant came over and ushered them up, and they grabbed their overhead luggage and left. Only then did I call the attendant over and explain what had happened. In much nicer terms, they told me I was foolish for not speaking up sooner, and even encouraged me to contact the Honolulu police. By then, I was exhausted from the entire situation and chose not to. It still bothers me today. I spent my whole vacation with my fiancée worried that I would run into Travis again. Thankfully, I never did. This might not sound like the most terrifying story, but being pinned in my seat and forced to listen to that kind of verbal cruelty from someone who felt entitled to me and my body was so brazen that the memory still gives me nightmares. Not all unsettling memories come from adulthood. One of the strangest and most frightening experiences of my life actually happened long before that flight, when I was just a teenager. Young love is supposed to be beautiful and thrilling, but most of it is nonsense. I was 16 when I had my first crush that felt serious. I was 16 and bored out of my mind on a family cruise. I first noticed the girl during the safety drill at the beginning of the trip. The heat was brutal, and most of the passengers looked miserable, probably visiting from cooler states. We were sailing out of Port Canaveral, Florida, my hometown, so none of it felt exciting to me. Other people were either overly excited or clearly suffering from the heat. As a teenage boy in the year 2000, I was already tired of the whole thing. I searched the crowd for anyone who looked as fed up as I was. That was when I saw her. Raven. She looked like a dream girl to an alternative teenager like me. She was dressed entirely in black despite the blazing summer sun, wearing very little, in a way that caught attention. I do not need to describe every detail, but to my 16-year-old mind, Raven was the most beautiful and mysterious goth girl I had ever seen. This was the era when people like us listened to 9 Inch Nails, Tool, Pantera, and sometimes Slipknot or Marilyn Manson. She fit that image perfectly. I believed she was a dream. I learned later that she was closer to a nightmare. It should have been obvious from the beginning, especially after I saw her actually growling at a little 5-year-old girl. That was the moment I first truly noticed Raven. The cruise had departed for the Caribbean. We had finished an early dinner, and then my parents sent me and my older sister off to explore, which meant they either wanted to gamble, drink, or disappear to their cabin, which I figured would be their plan for most of the vacation, both on and off the ship. I wandered around until I found a small arcade with a few token games, some video games, and even a couple of machines set to free play. A group of younger kids were crowded around a zombie shooter cabinet, playing terribly. The beautiful girl I had noticed earlier was standing near an ashtray, smoking, which gave my awkward self a little thrill, and she was glaring at the kids. Every so often, she made a sarcastic comment when one of them got hit by a monster on the screen. My sister Erin snuck up behind me and smacked my arm for staring at that girl. She told me to act normal and warned that she would make my life miserable if she ever caught me smoking. Then Erin kindly vanished into the endless corridors of the ship, leaving me to make my own mistakes. Back home, away from the ship, I was a shy and awkward kid who mostly kept to himself and listened to loud music in his room. But I decided that on this trip, I was going to be confident and cool, pretending like I had not been standing there watching her for the last 15 minutes. I walked up to the girl and introduced myself as Daniel. My sister and I, being named Daniel and Erin, have always felt a little too matching. That was when I found out her name was Raven, and that she described herself as a misanthrope and a misandrist. Those were her exact words. She said it meant she hated men and hated people in general. I pretended like I did not already know those terms, and acted as if I thought it sounded interesting and impressive. I even agreed with her. I said men were the worst, which made her laugh in a way that felt genuine, and I took that as a good sign. I was painfully awkward back then. We wandered through the arcade talking about everything we disliked, mostly how the cruise was boring, how modern life was pointless, how parents were annoying, and how the kids around us were irritating. Raven told me about all the bands she loved, which, she insisted, were far better than anything I listened to. And she said my taste in music was terrible, but somehow still acceptable. Raven dressed entirely in black, but I can see now that she was a walking warning sign. I would have noticed it at the time if I had not developed such an instant crush on her. I thought I was being clever and smooth by asking to see the pentagram necklace she was wearing, which conveniently gave me an excuse to look a little too closely. After asking a few times to examine it, I realized Raven enjoyed the attention, and I relaxed enough to pretend I was the kind of confident guy who could flirt without looking nervous. The more attention I gave her, the more it seemed to encourage her to do reckless things. She led me to the back corner of the arcade and pointed out that the security cameras did not reach that area. She knew, she said, because she had been on this ridiculous party cruise out of Miami 1,000 times. There was a digital cornhole machine that could be used to get a pile of tickets, and Raven showed me how to use the chain attached to my wallet to crack the plastic around the ticket dispenser and make a roll of tickets spill out. I hesitated until Raven got angry at me, saying that I was just like everyone else. Now, nervously, I looked around, and then suddenly, as fast as I could, I broke the machine. A limp strip of about 10 tickets came flopping out, and Raven grabbed them, got a little sneery, and then immediately tossed them into the trash. Now, next, Raven took me on a walk through the main atrium of the ship. She told me to stand on one side of the big central staircase and watch her as she moved through the crowd. I had no idea why, but I did not mind having an excuse to stare at her, so I did. I have to admit, she was a master at it. She stumbled, walked through the crowd, gently bumping into people here and there, and then turning all sweetness and smiles when she apologized. At one point, I saw her pointing to her leg and implying that she had some kind of disability, and an old woman even kissed her on the forehead, which made me laugh, as Raven's face turned to hidden horror. Eventually, Raven reached me and dragged me out of the atrium. She found a secluded spot under the stairs in a staff-only area of the ship, which gave me a small, nervous thrill again. And there, she pulled a stack of wallets and purses out of her jacket. She must have stolen at least 4 or 5, along with a wristwatch and a bracelet. I was a little amazed, but then deeply horrified. I tried arguing with her that we would get in serious trouble if she kept the stuff, and that was when she first started showing her real crazy side. She leaned into me and whispered that if I told anyone, she would not only blame me, but also claim that I had done terrible and unspeakable things to her to keep her quiet. Now, looking into her eyes, I truly believed her. And then she smiled at me and said something along the lines of, that would never happen, because of course she would keep her mouth shut. And then she removed all the paper money from the purses and wallets and tossed everyone's cards and belongings down a garbage chute. I was horrified, but did not feel like I could really say anything at that point. Somehow, over the next few days, I kept finding myself spending time with this Raven, even though the novelty was starting to fade. This was the point in my life where I discovered that I did not care how attractive someone was if they were an awful person. The problem now was that Raven was basically bullying me into staying with her because I had been present for some of her crimes, and I was too socially awkward and lacking in confidence to consider just saying that I had not done anything and that the girl did it. For example, a couple of days after the pickpocketing, Raven made me accompany her to one of the play areas for young children. There, she found a little girl playing by herself and kept telling her about how someone had fallen overboard and died, and that she had heard it was the girl's mother. The girl, for her part, did not believe Raven at first, but Raven would not relent. She described some truly violent and unpleasant scenarios about the girl's mother being eaten by sharks, or dragged under by an octopus, or torn apart by the ship's propellers. In the end, it became too much for the girl, who ran off crying, much to Raven's amusement. And she bullied a few other little kids too, which felt sick and tasteless to me. Now, another time she tried to force me to break into a vending machine again in the crew quarters. She laughed and said that some loser on the crew would take the blame, so there was no reason for us to care. At this point, it became obvious that Raven was trying to be deliberately cruel and unpleasant. I could not decide if she was trying to impress me or make me hate her, and looking back with adult insight, I think it was a little of both. Kind of sad, really, but at the same time, all I wanted was to be rid of her. I refused to vandalize the vending machine and stormed off to the sound of her trying to pry the keypad off the front. Somehow, Raven found me later, in the water park of all places. I was sure she would not be seen dead there, but she showed up in a black bikini with a slur written on the crotch, and I could tell she was trying to win me back over, and I had to fight all my teenage hormones not to let her succeed. When she reached into her bikini top and somehow pulled out a box of push pins, my heart sank. She explained that the plan was to toss them down the water slide and see what happened. I said there was no way I was going along with this, and there were little kids playing here, and also my sister was swimming with some friends. This was the first time I mentioned my sister, and Raven's eyes turned murderous. She demanded that I point my sister out to her, and then started asking me very strange questions, like whether I thought my sister was cooler than her, or smarter than her, and then, eventually, prettier than her. I told her in a flat voice that it was a disgusting way to talk. I said I do not think about my sister in that way, but Raven did not seem to care. She was clearly and furiously jealous of my sister for even existing, and this made her more determined to toss those pins down the water slide. I could only see one solution. I grabbed the box of those things from Ravenant, then tossed them over the side of the ship. The water park was on the upper deck, so it was not difficult to send that box of pins falling hundreds of feet into the ocean below. Nobody even noticed. Now, I expected Ravento to be furious at me, but instead, she just smiled and said that I passed the test and that I was a good person, so maybe I would finally get my reward. Now it was pretty clear what she was suggesting from her body language, and I hate the fact that I fell for it like some foolish teenage boy. Raven told me to meet her back on the same deck after dark. It was a smoking area that some of the passengers came to at night, but it was mostly quiet and we would not be disturbed. And then she slipped into the pool and disappeared into the crowd of people. I ate dinner with my parents and Aaron in the fanciest restaurant that night, but I could barely eat anything, feeling a mixture of excitement and mostly nervous sickness about meeting Raven. I knew she was trouble, and even though she was the prettiest girl who had ever paid attention to me, I knew deep down that it simply was not worth it. I thought about bringing it up to my parents or Aaron, but they all seemed to be having such a good time. My sister went off with some friends that she met on the ship. My parents went to an adults-only comedy show, and I just resigned myself to go and meet Raven. Maybe I would get something out of it at least. I was walking along a small, shadowy deck leading to the main water park promenade deck when I felt someone grab me. I was slammed up against the railing, which came up to my chest. Raven at this point was hissing at me. Her face was nothing but a tight mask of fury. She was angry. So angry that I had thrown her pins into the water. And then she started accusing me of being a pervert, a creep, and all sorts of things. She said that she had kept some of the credit cards and belongings that she had stolen from the crew, and that she was going to plant them in my sister's cabin. I told her that she had no idea what cabin my sister was in, and Raven proved me wrong by telling me exactly where Aaron was staying, and a whole bunch of other details about her. Raven said that she would ruin my sister's life if I did not do what she said. I asked her what she wanted, and she told me that I had to climb over the railing and throw myself into the sea. She said I would be fine, and it would be funny, but I had to do it to prove myself to her and protect Aaron. Now, I might have been a clueless kid, but even I was not clueless enough to think that you could just jump off the side of a 2,000-passenger cruise ship and survive it. There are 100 ways that could kill you. Sure, it could be possible to survive the initial fall, but even then, I would have to trust Ravento immediately raise the alarm, trust myself not to get sucked under the ship, which would almost certainly happen, and trust the sharks that no doubt circled in the Caribbean waters not to attack me. It had been a full sea day that day, so we were nowhere even close to land. What Raven was asking me to do was obviously very stupid. I looked at her and simply said that I would not do that. I figured that people do not really just successfully frame other people for random crimes, especially not strange, angry, 16-year-old goth girls. I could just tell someone what Raven was threatening, and it would be fine. I guess Raven knew that her threats were powerless too, because instead she lunged at me, taking me completely by surprise. She was a petite girl, but in that moment, she carried a wild strength as she tried to shove me up and over the railing. I don't think there was any real chance she could have done it. But then she grabbed me between my legs and started squeezing hard, telling me to get over the edge and into the sea if I knew what was good for me. I flailed my arms out and grabbed hold of the only thing within reach, one of those plastic life belts that are mounted along the decks of the ships. I caught one of the plastic handles, swung it forward, and hit Raven straight in the head with it. And I swear I struck her so hard in my panic that the life belt actually cracked apart. I would be lying if I said that I regretted it. I had never hit a girl before or since, but I can live with myself for doing it that one time. Right away, I was shouting for help, and some other passengers and the ship's crew eventually came running over. Thankfully, the deck had grainy security camera coverage, and there were a few distant eyewitnesses too, so the reason for my assault on Raven was eventually easily corroborated. I told the ship's security crew the whole story, admitting to every part that I played in it, staying silent while Raven went on her pickpocketing and vandalizing spree. More than once, I noticed a couple of the security guys sharing these very knowing looks, like my story was explaining some things. Things got a little strange after that. My parents started watching Aaron and me a little closer, so we did not have much freedom for the rest of the cruise. Instead, we spent quality family time together on the boat and in various ports. I had no idea what happened to someone if they committed a crime on a cruise ship. My parents and Aaron tell the story like I was worried sick about Raven in the aftermath. And I guess I was. She was a minor, and I knew nothing about her. She said that she had come on the cruise with her people, which I took to mean her family, but I had no real idea. And while we were still on the boat, despite my parents insisting I forget about her and try to enjoy the rest of the vacation, I begged them to see if they could find out what happened to Raven. It was very odd, and to this day, I still have no real answers about what became of her. When Dad spoke to the head of security, and I am sure a little money changed hands to get the information, he admitted that they had not been able to identify who Raven was actually on board with. She would not provide them with her real name, and there was nobody unaccounted for on the guest list who matched her description. They said that this had to mean she was the child of one of the crew members, but if so, then she was on board illegally. And because of this, they had no choice but to keep her locked in the brig for the rest of the voyage. And since she was a minor, she could not be handed over to authorities in the Caribbean either, and had to be processed back in Port Canaveral. Obviously, I never saw her again. Near the end of the voyage, my father checked in with the head of security again, and all he could tell us was that there had been no further developments with identifying Raven. So, to this day, the most memorable cruise I ever took was a terrifying one, with a girl of my dreams tried to force me overboard and get involved in crimes. I never even got to find out her real name, and it is entirely possible that the girl I spent the first week of my vacation with was a genuine, real-life stowaway. You would think that after everything on that cruise, I would have had enough strange encounters to last a lifetime. Yet one more incident, years later in Boston, became perhaps the most chilling of them all. I have visited Harvard Square many times. It is a pleasant tourist area of Boston, with plenty of shops and interesting things to do. Whenever I am in Boston for work, which is not often, I try to spend a bit of spare time there to walk around. However, every time I am there, especially if I take the subway from Harvard Square Station, I am reminded of something that happened to me more than 20 years ago that may have been one of the scariest moments in my life. It was quite late at night, and I had been out in Boston with some friends. It was during my college days, and one of my old housemates had transferred universities to one of the Boston schools and invited us down for a housewarming party. The party was scheduled for the next day, Friday, but that Thursday I had gone into downtown Boston to meet up with some other friends and spend time together. I did not get drunk, but I was slightly tipsy, and I found myself needing to get the subway back to Northgate, where my friends were staying. Originally, the plan was for the guy I had been out with to come home with me, but things did not really work out. Instead, we went our separate ways, which is how I found myself trying to get back alone. Taking the subway, even late at night, is normally quite safe and simple, especially on the Red Line, so I was not worried. By the time I left the bar, the weather was absolutely terrible. It was a heavy, thundering rainstorm. It was late October, and it had been a fairly mild month, but now the sky had completely opened up. The awful weather matched the mood I was in after things failed to work out with the guy. Of course, I did not even have an umbrella. So I hurried toward Harvard Square Station. And I did not normally like using that station back then, for reasons that would soon become clear. But this time, I decided to go ahead anyway. I had never seen Harvard Square Station so empty. There was barely anyone around. The few people who were there looked as miserable and exhausted as I felt. I remember there was a dirty-looking old man sitting near the trash cans, shivering in the rain. I ignored him and headed for the stairs. I have always had a serious fear of elevators. It is not claustrophobia, but something specific about elevators. That is why I usually avoided Harvard Square Station, especially as an exit, because there was a long staircase with nearly 200 steps leading down to and up from the platforms. And even though I was tired, going down did not seem so bad, at least not at first. If you have ever been to Harvard Square Station, the staircase is unsettling, to say the least. It was a winding spiral staircase, fairly narrow for a public one, and the inner wall was a metal grate, like something out of a horror movie, where the real world transforms into a kind of rusted-looking hell. It unsettled me at the best of times, but on that particular night, after I had gone about 20 steps down, I heard lonely, creeping footsteps behind me. For some reason, I decided to stop and listen, and the footsteps stopped too. I walked on a bit more, and the footsteps returned, and I was sure it was not just some echo of my own steps. I wished hard for another late-night pedestrian to come jogging down the stairs, or for me to meet a crowd going up, and there was not much chance of that on these stairs. People normally avoided them, but especially tonight, when everyone with any sense had already gone indoors. I walked down a little more, and the person followed me. Their footsteps were light, and I became convinced this was because they were trying to hide their presence. I stopped, and they stopped. I walked, and they walked. I wanted to start running, but I did not trust myself since I was still a little tipsy from the bar and I was wearing heels. I thought about slipping them off, but the idea of running down the Park Street Station stairs in Boston with bare feet stepping on who knows what sent a shudder through me. The person following me let out a strange, eerie whistling sound. I do not know what they were trying to achieve with that, other than to frighten me, but frighten me it did. I started hurrying down the stairs, and their footsteps sped up too. I paused, and again, so did they. This time, I reached into my purse and gripped my keys in my fist. Not the best weapon, but it had to do. For a second, I even considered turning around and marching back up to meet them, but I very quickly realized that would be extremely stupid. Instead, I carried on jog-walking down the stairs. The person was following me at an even pace, and every now and then when I stopped, I caught a glimpse of their shadow just lurking around the corner. I knew if I could get down into the station and onto the subway, everything would be fine. With the whistling and the stop-start footsteps, it felt like my stalker was only trying to unnerve me. They were toying with me, trying to scare me, but probably did not intend to do anything physical or serious. I had to hope anyway. I figured that if they were going to attack me, then halfway down the secluded stairs of Park Street Station would have been the perfect place to do so. But instead, they kept pace with me. I kept walking. My stalker let out another strange whistle, but now I was getting paranoid that they were actually summoning some other attacker, like calling on a gang or something. I remembered an old street film I had seen in college, and a line about warriors being called out to play started echoing in my head. I began whispering it to myself, like a mantra or a kind of war cry. I would not be the victim. I was the warrior, and I would fight anyone who cornered me in this dirty staircase that stank of damp and stale air. And there was no way that I was dying here tonight on the underground. and thank God. My feet hit the last step, and I forced myself to move faster, hurrying through the long corridors toward the platform. That was when I heard the footsteps behind me pick up speed as well. I had no intention of stopping to face whoever was following me. There were 3 minutes until the next train. If it arrived on time, someone else had to be waiting down there. The platform was never completely empty. Other passengers would have taken the elevator. I rushed out onto the platform and found no one at all. I let out a low moan of frustration, and the footsteps echoed closer in the hallway behind me. "You okay?" The sudden voice made me jump. A man had been standing beside a vending machine where I could not see him. He must have stepped out when he heard me. He was middle-aged, dressed in a neat business suit, an ordinary-looking man with a calm expression. He carried a briefcase. I remembered noticing that. Something about him felt immediately comforting. He reminded me of my uncle. Trying not to sound strange or panicked, I walked over to him and quickly explained that I thought someone had been stalking me down the staircase. The businessman looked doubtful. He suggested it might have been another passenger, simply taking the same route. I told him about the way the footsteps kept stopping and starting, and the strange whistling. He admitted that sounded unsettling, but assured me I was safe now. He said I could stay beside him until the train arrived. Then he joked that whoever had been following me must have given up, because the corridor was empty. Almost the instant he finished speaking, a shape appeared around the corner. Sometimes you can tell right away when a person is acting suspicious. This girl moved exactly like that. She crept into view as if she truly had been chasing someone down the stairs. Her eyes were wide and frantic. Her skin looked grimy, dotted with sweat and acne. Her hair clung to her head in damp strands that might have been rain or grease. She seemed close to my age, maybe even younger. If she was not homeless, she looked as though she could have been. Her clothes were stained and unwashed. One detail has stayed clear in my mind all these years, even when other parts of the memory feel uncertain. She wore mismatched shoes. One was an old, dirty trainer that might once have been white. The other was a ripped black sneaker covered in faded neon pink patterns. For some reason, the sight of those shoes has never left me. The businessman whispered that it seemed my stalker had finally shown up, and she must have heard him because it caught her attention. That was when she noticed me standing with him. I had never seen someone shift from acting so suspicious and threatening to looking so terrified. It felt as if the predator suddenly became the prey. The girl looked at me and then at the businessman and genuinely froze in place. Then she let out a small scream as she stared into his face. My stalker spun on her heel, and I finally understood that phrase. She ran back around the corner and down the corridor. I heard the footsteps of her mismatched shoes slapping against the station floor and the panicked whistling sound she made as she fled. The next thing I knew, the train had pulled up. The businessman invited me to ride with him as far as his stop. I told him I was getting off at Brookline Village, and he said he was heading there as well, so we could ride the whole way together. Grateful to him for managing to scare away my dangerous stalker, I took the short journey beside him while telling him about my college course, my ambitions for the future, and even chatting about the 2002 NBA Finals that had concluded the previous summer. He got off at Brookline Village with me and escorted me close to my friend's apartment, which struck me as very kind of him. Relieved to be safe from my strange stalker, I went inside, made a cup of tea, and thought nothing more about it. That changed when I told my friend the whole story shortly afterward. I was so focused on explaining how my unexpected savior had scared the stalker away with a single glance that I failed to consider the real issue. The young girl had been utterly terrified to see the businessman. He had only been standing there with me. He never threatened her or even acknowledged her. If she had been planning to rob me, It might have frustrated her to realize I was no longer alone. But this reaction felt completely different. She had come around that corner all furtive and sneaky, and the moment she saw him, she screamed and ran. Looking back on it now, I am convinced that I saw a flash of recognition on her face when she noticed him. The girl had definitely been following me with some kind of ill intent. She stalked me down those stairs and crept onto the platform searching for me. She was a frightening person herself. Yet something about the businessman sent even someone like that running in fear. I rode home with him, and he walked me almost to my friend's door, and I never felt any bad vibes from him. But that does not prove anything. My stalker clearly felt something very different. I am convinced she recognized him and perhaps even knew him, and that he had previously done something to her far more terrifying than whatever she had planned for me. I have no idea what that might have been, but I cannot shake the feeling that my savior that night could have been far more dangerous than the person he saved me from. Unless one day I see his much older face on the news, the truth will remain something I never understand.